In 1997, Lisa Davis went to get a gallon of milk in Iowa City. She was gone in 240 seconds. No struggle, no tracks, just a bike propped against a brick wall. 17 years of silence, a marriage destroyed, a mother told she'd never hold her child again, until a medical emergency in a different state revealed a terrifying truth. Maya tried to save her dying mother with a blood donation, but the doctor had a message that stopped her heart. Biologically, this woman isn't even related to you. She wasn't a daughter, she was a trophy, and the woman she called mom was actually her kidnapper. This is the impossible homecoming of Lisa Davis. Alara Davis didn't scream when she opened the envelope. She didn't cry either. Her hands started shaking so violently she had to sit down on the kitchen floor. 6 years. 6 years since her daughter vanished. 6 years of empty bedrooms, unanswered prayers, and a house that felt louder in its silence than it ever did when Lisa was alive. The envelope was plain. No return address, no explanation, just her name. Inside was a torn piece of notebook paper. Nothing fancy, nothing dramatic. 3 words written with heavy pressure, like the pen was angry. She read them once, then again. She is beautiful. That was it. No name, no location, no mercy. Alara stopped breathing for a moment, because those words didn't belong to a stranger guessing. They belonged to someone who knew. You don't describe a missing child in the present tense unless you've seen her. You don't comment on beauty unless you're watching someone grow. And suddenly, 6 years of silence felt intentional. Here's the question that should make your stomach turn. If someone knew your missing child was alive, why stay silent for 6 years? Why let a mother rot in grief? Why let birthdays pass with no candles? Why let a family tear itself apart while you held the truth in your hands? This wasn't comfort. This wasn't kindness. This was power. If this letter arrived at your door, would you believe it? Or would it destroy you all over again? Because this wasn't hope without cost. This was hope sharpened into a weapon. Someone out there knew exactly what they were doing, and they wanted Alara to know it too. Stay with us. This story doesn't move the way you expect. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. In the summer of 1997, Iowa City felt like a place where fear didn't have permission to live. Not because nothing bad ever happened, but because it felt contained, distant, manageable. Trouble belonged to other towns, other highways, other names on the evening news. Maple Street carried that confidence. Wide sidewalks worn smooth by decades of kids running home before dinner. Tall trees lining the road like quiet witnesses to everyday life. Bikes leaned against fences without locks. Front doors stayed open long enough for conversations to finish themselves. At night, the neighborhood settled into a familiar rhythm. Crickets. Televisions murmuring through open windows. The soft hum of streetlights coming alive one by one. Parents didn't hover here. They trusted. They waved. They believed that knowing your neighbors meant knowing your risks. This was the kind of place many of us recognize instantly. The kind of place we grew up in, where independence came early and worry came late, if it came at all. Iowa City didn't feel careless. It felt secure. And that sense of security shaped every decision made on Maple Street that summer, especially the ones no one thought twice about. The Davis house didn't stand out on Maple Street, and that was part of its comfort. It looked like 100 other homes nearby, 2 stories, a porch that caught the evening breeze, windows that stayed open longer than most. Inside, life moved with a quiet order. Alara Davis kept the home grounded. She noticed details others missed: unwashed cups, unfinished sentences, changes in tone. Her care wasn't loud or strict, it was constant. She listened more than she spoke, and when she spoke, people paid attention. Julian Davis balanced her presence with routine. He believed consistency kept families steady. Dinner at the same time, chores done before dark, small rules meant to prevent big problems. Together, they believed they were doing everything right. Not perfectly, but responsibly. They loved their daughter without suffocating her. They gave her room to grow while believing the world around them would meet them halfway. On Maple Street, that kind of balance felt normal, safe, earned, and for years it worked. Lisa Davis was 14, caught in that brief space between childhood and becoming someone new. She wasn't quiet, but she wasn't reckless either. She had opinions, curiosity, and a way of noticing the world that felt older than her age. Her sketchbooks followed her everywhere. They were stacked on the coffee table, tucked under her bed, forgotten on the porch. Faces filled the pages. Animals. Places she hadn't seen yet, but somehow already knew. Lisa moved through Maple Street with ease. She waved at neighbors. She remembered names. She rode her bike with the confidence of someone who believed roads existed to be used, not feared. At home, she was the center without trying to be. Her laughter filled rooms. Her footsteps announced when the day was changing pace. When she was gone, the house noticed. To Alara, Lisa was vigilance and hope wrapped together. To Julian, she was proof that structure worked. To both of them, she was the future, spoken about casually, assumed freely. No one described Lisa as fragile. She didn't look like someone danger would choose. She looked like someone life would keep, and that belief, that sense of safety around her, was shared by everyone who knew her. The decision didn't come from urgency, it came from habit. That evening moved slowly, the way summer nights do when nothing feels rushed. Dinner had ended. The house had settled. Someone reached into the fridge and noticed the milk was gone. It was a small inconvenience, the kind families solve without discussion. Lisa offered to go. 3 blocks. A straight path she knew by heart. A store she'd visited more times than anyone could count. Alara paused, just briefly. Not from fear, more from instinct. Julian didn't hesitate, because everything about the request felt reasonable. Lisa grabbed her bike, tied her hair back, and smiled as she headed out the door. She promised she'd be quick. She always was. No argument followed her. No warning stayed behind. Because nothing about that night felt like the start of a tragedy. It felt like trust, and trust was the rule on Maple Street. We've all trusted nights like this. That's what makes it dangerous. The quick stop sat exactly where it always had. Bright, ordinary, forgettable. That night, its lights hummed steadily against the darkening sky as cars passed without slowing. Security cameras caught Lisa at 7:51 p.m. The footage was grainy, stripped of sound and detail, but clear enough to confirm what mattered. Lisa walked in alone. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't looking over her shoulder. She greeted the clerk, picked up a gallon of milk, paid with a $5 bill. At 7:56 p.m., she walked back out. That timestamp would later be replayed more times than anyone could count. 5 minutes inside the store, less than 30 seconds at the counter. No one followed her out on camera. No raised voices were reported, no disturbance logged that night. From the store's perspective, the evening stayed normal. From the outside, the street looked the same as it always did. Cars moved through, lights changed, people passed by without stopping. Those 5 minutes are the last confirmed record of Lisa Davis moving freely. After that, time keeps going. But Lisa doesn't appear in it again. From the moment Lisa stepped out of the quick stop at 7:56 p.m., the timeline began to narrow. Investigators later walked the route themselves. From the gas station to Maple Street was just over 3 blocks, 7 minutes on a bike, 10 at a relaxed pace. Even with traffic lights and uneven sidewalks, it was a short, familiar ride. One Lisa had made countless times before, which meant something happened fast. Between 7:56 p.m. and 8:30 p.m., when concern finally tipped into panic, there were exactly 34 minutes unaccounted for. Not hours, not even one full television episode. 34 ordinary minutes where nothing extraordinary was reported, yet everything changed. No neighbors recalled hearing raised voices. No drivers reported a sudden stop or a near collision. No one remembered seeing a girl pedaling frantically or walking in distress. The streetlights flickered on right on schedule. Porch radios played softly. Cicadas filled the air with their constant hum. By all external measures, the neighborhood moved through the evening undisturbed. That absence became its own form of evidence. Because in cases involving force, there is almost always disruption. A sound, a witness, a moment that doesn't fit. Here, the environment stayed intact, as if Lisa had simply been edited out of it. When officers later mapped the window on a whiteboard, timestamps written in block letters, it became clear how unforgiving it was. Whoever intervened, if anyone did, had to act with precision, no hesitation, no visible conflict. And if Lisa had chosen to stop somewhere on her own, there was only one question investigators couldn't answer. Why leave everything behind to do it? The timeline didn't explain her disappearance. It challenged it. It's because every passing minute inside that 34-minute window pointed to the same unsettling conclusion. Whatever happened, happened quietly. Julian found the bike first. It was leaning against the brick wall in the narrow alley behind the quick stop, positioned carefully, almost respectfully. The kickstand was down. The handlebars were straight. Nothing about it suggested urgency or impact. It looked like it had been parked, not abandoned. Then he saw the milk. The gallon sat upright on the concrete, a few inches from the rear tire. The plastic was slick with condensation, beads of water sliding down its sides and pooling beneath it. The seal was intact. The cap unopened. It hadn't been dropped. That detail mattered more than anyone realized at the time. Milk isn't something you leave behind casually. It's perishable. It's heavy. You don't set it down unless you expect to pick it back up within seconds. The longer it sat there, warming in the open air, the louder the question became. Why would she put it down at all? Police arrived to a scene that refused to cooperate. There were no scuff marks on the ground, no signs of a bike skidding or tipping over. The alley showed no evidence of a confrontation. No disturbed gravel, no broken items, no trace of haste. Lisa's bike helmet wasn't there. Neither was her backpack, just the bicycle and the milk, left behind like placeholders. As officers photographed the scene, one fact settled uncomfortably into place. Whatever interrupted Lisa's routine did not announce itself. It didn't explode into violence. It didn't leave a mess. It simply stepped in and removed her. By 9:15 p.m., Detective Miller stood in the alley, staring at what wasn't there. In 1997, investigations moved at the speed of paper and phone calls. There were no instant alerts pushed to every screen, no digital trail to rewind. Officers worked with flashlights, notebooks, and whatever the environment was willing to give up. This one gave up nothing. The bike was processed and tagged. The milk was bagged, more out of obligation than expectation. Nearby dumpsters were checked. Sheds were unlocked. Patrols canvassed the surrounding blocks, knocking on doors and asking the same questions again and again. Did you hear anything? Did you see anyone? Did anything feel off? The answers were always the same. No, no, no. The absence of resistance complicated everything. Without signs of force, investigators couldn't escalate resources the way they would in a confirmed violent incident. Without witnesses, they couldn't narrow a suspect pool. And without evidence of intent, they couldn't even agree on what kind of disappearance they were dealing with. Miller returned to the timeline, tracing it with his finger as if repetition might expose a flaw. 7:56 p.m. Exit. 8:30 p.m. Reported missing. He stopped halfway through, looked up, and asked the question no one wanted to answer. If there was no struggle, where did she go? That question fractured the room because it forced a choice between two possibilities, both equally unsettling. Either someone took her without resistance, or she went with them willingly. And if that was true, the danger wasn't loud. It was convincing. Comment what you think happened, abduction or manipulation. The first night felt different. It carried momentum, the dangerous kind that convinces people effort alone can bend reality. By midnight, volunteers poured in from every direction. Neighbors who had never spoken beyond polite nods now stood shoulder to shoulder, gripping flashlights like lifelines. Pickup trucks lined the roads. Dogs barked in unfamiliar yards. Someone brought thermoses of coffee that went untouched. Names were called into the dark. Lisa! Again and again. Flashlight beams sliced through tall grass, jittering across fence posts and drainage ditches. Every shadow looked like a possibility. Every sound caused heads to turn. Hope was still loud then, fragile, but loud enough to push exhaustion aside. Search grids were drawn hastily, revised constantly. People fanned out into nearby lots, playgrounds, construction sites. Officers coordinated as best they could, but there was no master system yet, just paper maps and instincts. In 1997, urgency ran on human legs. Someone swore they saw movement near the tree line. Another thought they heard a voice by the creek. Each claim pulled the group in a new direction, stretching attention thinner with every hour. Ilara walked until her feet ached, her voice raw from repeating one word. She searched faces as much as terrain, waiting for someone, anyone, to bring certainty. Julian stayed close at first, then drifted into silence, his energy burning out in waves. By dawn, the mood shifted. Flashlights dimmed. Conversations slowed. Volunteers began to look at their watches, then at the ground, then back toward their cars. Hope didn't vanish. It thinned, diluted by fatigue and unanswered effort. The sun rose anyway, and with it came the first unbearable realization. Nothing had been found. By the second day, the search expanded outward, swallowing distance without yielding answers. Cornfields stretched in every direction, tall and dense, their rows closing in behind each step. Volunteers moved through them slowly, hands brushing leaves, calling Lisa's name into walls of green that gave nothing back. The plants rustled in the breeze, disguising footsteps, swallowing sound. It was easy to believe something could disappear there forever. Teams spread along the riverbanks next. The Iowa River moved steadily, indifferent to the urgency surrounding it. Officers scanned the water's surface, then its edges, eyes tracing driftwood and reeds for anything that didn't belong. The banks were muddy, uneven, and marked by animal tracks and broken branches, but none that led to a missing girl. Each search ended the same way. People circled back empty-handed. The physical scale of the effort became its own kind of weight. Every mile covered without result made the absence heavier, harder to carry. For some volunteers, the repetition was unbearable. They searched the same ground twice, then a third time, as if persistence alone might force the earth to respond. It didn't. Alara watched the process with a growing sense of helplessness. She followed when allowed, waited when she wasn't, her gaze fixed on every bag, every stretcher, every movement that hinted at closure, any kind of closure. But there was none. Nature didn't resist the search. It absorbed it. And with every quiet return from the fields and the river, hope thinned just a little more. For the first few days, the story led every broadcast. Local anchors spoke Lisa's name with careful seriousness. Her photo filled the screen, framed by urgent language and hotline numbers. Newspapers ran updates on the front page, then just below the fold, then farther back with each passing edition. And then gradually, the tone changed. The updates became shorter, the questions less specific. Another story took the lead. A fire, a trial, something easier to explain. By the end of the second week, Lisa's disappearance was no longer breaking news. It was a reminder. Missing posters followed the same trajectory. They went up everywhere at first. Telephone poles, storefront windows, bulletin boards at grocery stores and churches. Fresh paper, dark ink. Faces that demanded attention. Time did what time always does. Edges curled, corners tore, or rain blurred the ink. Sunlight bleached the color until Lisa's smile faded into a pale suggestion of itself. People walked past without slowing. Some didn't notice them at all anymore. Tips slowed to a trickle. The phone rang less often. When it did, the calls were uncertain. Half memories, secondhand stories, sightings that dissolved under basic questions. Each one required energy to chase, and each dead end drained a little more of what remained. For Alara, the quiet was unbearable. Not the absence of answers, but the sense that the world had decided to continue without them. Injustice didn't announce itself. It settled in slowly, carried on indifference, until forgetting felt almost reasonable to everyone except the mother who couldn't afford it. By the end of the first month, Iowa City found its rhythm again. Morning traffic returned to predictable patterns. Cafes filled. Laughter drifted from patios in the evenings. Life resumed not because answers had been found, but because waiting forever wasn't an option for people who hadn't lost anything. Searches became smaller, quieter, easier to cancel. Volunteers stopped calling. Officers were reassigned. The case didn't close. It thinned, stretched across filing cabinets and fading urgency. Lisa Davis became a name spoken less often, then carefully, then only when prompted. Alara noticed the shift everywhere. Neighbors stopped asking for updates. Conversations changed direction when she approached. Sympathy, once abundant, hardened into discomfort. People didn't know what to say anymore, and silence was easier than saying the wrong thing. The posters remained. They just aged. Paper peeled from poles. Staples rusted. Wind tore faces in half. Someone scribbled over one with a marker, not out of cruelty, but carelessness. The image of a 14-year-old girl became part of the scenery, easy to ignore because it had been there too long. This was how forgetting worked, not all at once, not intentionally. It happened when attention moved on, and stories like Lisa's didn't disappear because they lacked importance. They disappeared because fewer people were watching, fewer people listening, fewer people willing to carry the weight of unresolved truth. That was the most exhausting realization of all, because silence doesn't mean nothing happened. It means no one is paying attention anymore. These cases don't survive on justice. They survive on memory. And memory fades when no one stays. Grief didn't announce itself in Alara's body all at once. It arrived quietly, disguised as exhaustion. At first, it was the headaches, persistent, dull, easy to dismiss. Then came the nights without sleep, the mornings where standing felt heavier than it should. Doctors offered explanations that stayed safely vague. Stress, fatigue, time would help. Time did the opposite. By the end of the first year, Alara's pain had become impossible to ignore. It rooted itself deep, flaring without warning, stealing breath and focus. Tests followed. Appointments multiplied. Hospital rooms replaced the familiar quiet of Maple Street. The diagnosis came with clinical calm, but the consequences were anything but. Her condition had worsened under prolonged strain. The body, stretched too long by waiting and fear, had begun to fail in ways medicine couldn't reverse gently. Procedures were attempted, then another, then a complication no one had planned for. The final conversation happened late at night, under fluorescent lights that made everything feel unreal. The surgery wasn't optional. The word permanent hung in the air long after the doctor left. Lisa had been Alara's only child. Every imagined future, grandchildren, family holidays, second chances, had lived quietly in her mind, untouched by tragedy. Now those futures were gone too, not stolen suddenly, but removed methodically, clinically. Recovery was slow. Physical healing demanded attention Alara didn't want to give. Each scar felt like confirmation that while the world waited for answers about her daughter, her own life was closing doors without asking permission. She had lost a child to silence. Now she was losing the possibility of ever beginning again, and no one could tell her which loss she was supposed to survive first. Grief did not pull Alara and Julian closer. It revealed how differently they endured pain. Alara stayed rooted in the house on Maple Street, moving through rooms that still carried Lisa's presence. She kept routines intact, as if repetition could preserve what had been taken. Meals were prepared on schedule. Lisa's room remained untouched. Waiting became her way of surviving. Julian chose motion instead. At first, it looked like strength. He took extra hours at work, volunteered for projects no one wanted, stayed late under the justification of responsibility. But over time, the pattern sharpened. Work wasn't purpose, it was distance. Silence settled between them. They stopped talking about Lisa, not because the subject was resolved, but because it led nowhere they could reach together. Alara needed to remember. Julian needed to escape remembering. Each believed the other was choosing the wrong way to survive. Their arguments weren't loud. They unfolded in pauses, in missed glances, in decisions made alone. Julian came home later. Alara stopped asking where he'd been. Grief didn't break them in a single moment. It thinned them, stretching connection until it no longer held. Love remained, but it was misaligned. Alara felt abandoned in her vigilance. Julian felt suffocated by a past that refused to loosen its grip. Neither was wrong. Neither could bend without losing themselves. The house on Maple Street became divided not by walls, but by direction. One of them was staying behind. The other was already learning how to leave. By the time the word divorce was spoken, the decision had already been made in silence. It didn't come after a fight. There was no single moment to point to, no final argument that tipped the scale. It arrived the way erosion does, slow, inevitable, unnoticed, until the structure can no longer stand. Julian was the one who filed. To him, it felt like survival. The house on Maple Street had become a place where time refused to move forward. Every room echoed with absence. Every day ended exactly where it began. Leaving wasn't about abandoning Lisa. It was about escaping the version of himself who couldn't breathe there anymore. To Alara, it felt like a second disappearance. The paperwork was signed quietly. There were no lawyers circling, no public confrontation. Just dates, signatures, and a final walk through a house neither of them knew how to reclaim. Julian packed what he needed and left behind what felt too heavy to take. The community noticed immediately. Iowa City had followed the case closely in the beginning. Now it followed the fallout in whispers. In grocery aisles and church foyers, people spoke in lowered voices. Some sympathized, others judged, everyone speculated. Julian remarried within 2 years. His new life unfolded on the outskirts of town, away from Maple Street, away from the constant reminder of what never came home. From the outside, it looked like closure, like progress. Alara remained. She stayed in the house where waiting had become a permanent state. To the city, the divorce marked an ending. To her, it was proof that grief didn't just take children. It took marriages too, and it never asked permission first. After the divorce, Alara became something Iowa City didn't know how to hold. She took a job at the local library, a place where quiet was expected, and order offered a thin kind of comfort. Shelving books gave her hands something to do. Dates and categories made sense in ways life no longer did. But even there, she was watched differently. People lowered their voices when she passed. Not out of cruelty, but discomfort. Alara carried the weight of an unresolved story, and no one wanted to be reminded of how it ended, or rather, how it didn't. Conversations stalled around her. Invitations stopped arriving. Grief made her inconvenient. She aged without milestones. Every birthday Lisa should have had lived silently in Alara's calculations. 16, 18, 21. She imagined her daughter's face changing, her voice deepening, her handwriting steadier. Time moved forward everywhere except where Alara stood. The city had learned to remember Lisa as a cautionary tale. Alara remembered her as unfinished. To some, she became the frozen woman, the mother who never moved on, never let go, never accepted what everyone else had quietly decided. They mistook endurance for denial, waiting for weakness. But Alara wasn't waiting for the past. She was waiting for proof. And then, 6 years later, something broke the silence. The day the letter arrived didn't announce itself. It slipped in quietly, hidden among grocery circulars and utility bills, the kind of mail Alara sorted through on autopilot. The afternoon light slanted across the kitchen table, catching dust in the air. Everything about the moment suggested routine, until her hand stopped. The envelope was plain white, no logos, no stamps that stood out, no return address in the corner where one should have been. It didn't carry the weight of importance, just a thin rectangle of paper, light enough to be dismissed if not for one detail. The handwriting. It wasn't printed. It wasn't rushed. Each letter was deliberate, pressed hard enough into the paper to leave faint grooves on the back. Instead of her name, the address read simply, "The Woman at 412 Maple." Alara stared at it longer than necessary. No one called her that. Neighbors used her name. The library used her employee number. Official letters came typed, sterile, impersonal. This was something else. Someone had taken time to define her, not by who she was, but by where she remained. Her hand shook as she turned the envelope over. Nothing. No explanation waiting on the back, in no clue that softened the edges of what it might contain. Just silence sealed in paper. She didn't open it right away. The envelope rested on the table as Alara paced the length of the kitchen, every instinct warning her that once she crossed that line, there would be no returning to the life she had learned to endure. For 6 years, Hope had lived only in memory and imagination. This was different. This was intrusion. She sat down slowly, the chair scraping against the tile, and held the envelope as if it might bruise her. Whatever was inside had survived the years. It had found her, and it had chosen today to speak. Alara unfolded the paper slowly, as if speed might damage whatever waited inside. It was a torn piece of notebook paper, uneven edge, no date, no greeting. The ink was dark, pressed firmly into the fibers, the kind of pressure that suggested hesitation followed by resolve. 3 words stood alone. "She is beautiful." For a moment, Alara didn't understand what she was reading. The words were simple, almost gentle. Then meaning rushed in all at once, and her body reacted before her mind could steady it. Her knees gave way. She sank to the kitchen floor, the paper slipping from her fingers, her breath turning shallow and sharp. The words were wrong in every expected way. They weren't cruel. They weren't mocking. They weren't asking for anything. They were observational. Beautiful was not a word you used for a memory. It wasn't how people spoke about a 14-year-old frozen in time on a missing poster. It was a word shaped by comparison, by change, by watching someone grow into themselves. That was the fracture point. If the note had claimed certainty, alive, safe, here, Alara could have doubted it. If it had demanded something, she could have followed procedure. But this offered no action, only implication. Someone had seen Lisa recently enough to describe her as she was now. Alara picked the paper back up and studied the handwriting. The strokes were controlled. Adult. The final word was darker, heavier, as if the writer had paused there, pressing down harder than intended. This wasn't random cruelty. It wasn't nostalgia. It was presence. For 6 years, Alara had survived by managing absence, by accepting that hope was something dangerous to touch. These 3 words shattered that structure completely. Hope didn't return gently. It arrived fully formed and impossible to ignore. Alara brought the letter to the police the following morning. She didn't call ahead. She didn't ask permission. She walked into the station with the paper folded carefully in her coat pocket, her movements steady in a way they hadn't been for years. This wasn't grief speaking anymore. It was urgency. Detective Miller read the note once, then again. He didn't react the way she expected. There was no sharp intake of breath, no flicker of recognition. He set the paper on the desk between them and leaned back, choosing his words with practiced caution. "It doesn't give us anything to work with," he said. They tried anyway. The envelope was unremarkable, the paper common, the ink mass-produced. Too many hands had touched it before it reached her. No return address meant no trail. No signature meant no direction. Every path ended where it began. Miller explained possibilities in a calm, professional tone. A cruel prank, someone who remembered the case, a person seeking attention. Without context, the letter couldn't justify reopening resources already stretched thin. Alara listened without interrupting. She had heard versions of this before. What she hadn't heard was an explanation for the certainty in the words, for the confidence of observation, for the way the note didn't ask for belief. It assumed it. "This isn't nothing," she said quietly. Miller didn't disagree, but agreement wasn't action. When Alara left the station, the letter still folded in her pocket, something had shifted. The police had done what procedure allowed, what they always allowed. For the first time, she understood that waiting for permission had kept her exactly where she was. And if the silence was ever going to break, she would have to be the one to do it. Julian read the letter in silence. He stood near the kitchen counter, the paper held loosely between his fingers, his eyes fixed on the 3 words as if staring too long might give them power they didn't deserve. When he finally looked up, his expression wasn't anger, it was fear. "This doesn't change anything," he said. "It's just ink on paper." Alara recognized the tone immediately. It was the same one he had used when the searches slowed, when the calls stopped coming, when the city decided enough time had passed to justify moving on. Julian wasn't being cruel. He was protecting the life he had rebuilt away from unanswered questions. "You can't do this again," he continued. "You can't let something like this pull you back." Back into what? Alara wondered. Waiting, hoping, believing her daughter hadn't vanished into nothing? Julian talked about healing, about acceptance, about how reopening the past only reopened wounds. He said Lisa would want her to be at peace. He said chasing shadows would only leave her hurt all over again. Alara listened. She always did. But something had changed. For 6 years, she had been told to let go of silence, to make peace with absence. This wasn't absence. This was intrusion. Someone had reached into her life and spoken about her daughter in the present tense. That mattered. Julian folded the letter and handed it back, already retreating emotionally. To him, believing was risk. To Alara, ignoring it was surrender. They stood on opposite sides of the same truth. When Julian left, Alara sat alone at the table, the letter resting in front of her. The fear was still there, but now it pointed outward instead of inward. If someone could watch her daughter grow up without consequence, then ignorance was the real danger. And if something like this happened near you, on your street, in your town, wouldn't you want to know? That question settled heavily in the quiet, because Alara had already decided. She wasn't letting this go. Waiting had rules. You stayed hopeful but not demanding. You trusted systems. You respected time. Alara had followed those rules for years, and they had led nowhere. The shift didn't arrive as a dramatic decision. It came quietly on an ordinary night when she realized she could no longer tell the difference between patience and paralysis. Waiting hadn't preserved hope. It had preserved stillness. So she changed the question. Not when will someone find answers, but why hasn't anyone looked the way I would? She cleared the dining table and stacked old folders beside the lamp. Newspaper clippings, handwritten timelines, notes from phone calls long forgotten. She wasn't chasing certainty. She was building context, one date at a time, one gap at a time. This wasn't defiance. It was acceptance of responsibility. Ilara understood something most people avoid. No one cared about the details the way she did, not because others were cruel, but because distance dulls urgency. For her, every unanswered hour still mattered. She didn't announce what she was doing. There was no declaration, just repetition. Night after night, reading, sorting, comparing. The work didn't make the pain disappear, but it gave it direction. Perseverance isn't loud, it's quiet, unimpressive, unseen, and that's why it lasts. Somewhere between midnight and morning, Ilara stopped waiting for permission. She stopped hoping someone else would connect the pieces. The work had begun, not because she believed she would succeed, but because doing nothing had finally become impossible. If you've ever been the only one still asking questions long after everyone else stopped, then you already understand what pushed her forward. This wasn't obsession yet. It was clarity finding its footing. The computer hummed like it was tired of being awake. Ilara waited through the connection tones, listening as the modem clawed its way into the digital world. The screen flickered. Pages loaded slowly, line by line, as if reluctant to give up their secrets. This wasn't the internet people know now. There were no shortcuts, no algorithms offering answers, just raw information and the patience required to sift through it. Ilara searched names first, then dates, then locations. She learned how to narrow results, how to cross-reference articles buried deep in digital archives, old crime summaries, local news posts that hadn't been updated in years, half-finished threads abandoned mid-thought. Most led nowhere, but every dead end taught her something. What had already been tried, what had been dismissed too quickly, what details had never been followed at all. She printed everything. Stacks of paper grew beside the desk. Ink-stained notes crowded the margins. Time stopped behaving normally. Hours collapsed into minutes. Sleep became optional. There was isolation in the glow of that screen. Friends didn't understand why she stayed up so late, why she canceled plans, why she cared so deeply about fragments most people overlooked. But fragments were all she had ever been given, and she learned something else during those nights. Distance doesn't erase truth, it hides it. The longer a story goes untouched, the easier it is to reshape, to misremember, to soften. Ilara wasn't searching for closure. She was searching for consistency. If something didn't fit, she circled it. If a timeline wavered, she rebuilt it herself. The work demanded discipline, not emotion. And slowly, quietly, she became fluent in her daughter's disappearance in a way no one else ever had. This wasn't technology giving her answers. It was effort giving her control. The first reply arrived at 2:14 a.m. It was short, careful, from someone who didn't use their real name. They said they remembered the case, not clearly, but enough to feel uneasy reading Ilara's post. That was how it began. Message boards weren't polished spaces. They were cluttered, inconsistent, filled with speculation and grief in equal measure. Parents searching for children, siblings chasing rumors, strangers drawn together by unfinished stories. Ilara learned the etiquette quickly. Don't demand, don't accuse. Ask precisely, share sparingly, trust slowly. Every post carried a risk. People vanished mid-conversation. Threads went silent without explanation. Some users were sincere. Others were drawn to attention more than truth. Sorting them required intuition as much as logic. Connection didn't eliminate loneliness. It sharpened it. Reading other stories forced Ilara to confront what endurance really looked like. Some had waited longer than she had. Some were still searching decades later. Their persistence wasn't dramatic. It was mechanical. Wake up, check messages, follow leads, repeat. In these digital spaces, time felt suspended. Everyone existed in the same moment of not knowing. Ilara began sharing what she had learned: patterns, discrepancies, unanswered questions. People responded. Sometimes they pushed back. Sometimes they added context she hadn't considered. Each exchange refined her thinking. She stopped talking about feelings. She talked about facts. Isolation followed her offline. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations thinned. But online, she was understood. Not pitied, not rushed, not told to move on. She was treated as capable. These weren't investigators by title. They were survivors of silence. And together, they traded fragments like currency, building something sturdier than hope. Not answers. Frameworks. And frameworks, Ilara learned, could hold weight. People began to talk. Not loudly, not directly. The kind of talk that happens after doors close, that uses concern as a disguise. They said Ilara was stuck, that she couldn't let go, that the hours online, the notes, the lists, none of it was healthy. She heard it all. And for a moment, she wondered if they were right. Then she compared two timelines side by side and noticed a discrepancy no one had addressed. A gap that shouldn't exist. A detail repeated in different places with different times attached to it. That's when the word obsession stopped fitting. What Ilara was doing required restraint, focus, consistency. She wasn't spiraling, she was narrowing. Each day brought fewer assumptions and sharper questions. Emotion no longer drove the work. Precision did. Clarity doesn't look dramatic from the outside. It looks repetitive, uncelebrated, easy to misunderstand. Ilara stopped explaining herself. She trusted the process she had built, the routines, the discipline, the quiet progress no one else could see. She learned when to stop reading and when to dig deeper, when to disengage, when to wait. This wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving something true. Underdogs don't announce their turning points. They accumulate them. Small wins stacked carefully until momentum becomes undeniable. If you've ever been told you're doing too much, when you know you're finally doing the right thing, you understand the balance Ilara struck. Not driven by fixation, guided by resolve. And for the first time since the letter arrived, her work didn't just feel necessary, it felt possible. Her name is Maya now, but that wasn't the name she was born with. 17 years after a girl vanished without a trace, a different young woman was living under a new identity, unaware that her life had begun somewhere else. To the outside world, Maya was ordinary, quiet, responsible, easy to overlook. Inside her home, she was protected like something fragile. Nadine called it love. Every rule came wrapped in concern. Doors locked twice. Curfews earlier than everyone else's. Phone calls answered immediately. Maya grew up believing vigilance was normal, that safety required constant attention. Her childhood was structured, predictable, controlled, lunches packed, schedules followed. Nadine never missed a school event, never sat far, never stopped watching. Teachers praised her involvement. Neighbors called her devoted. No one questioned devotion. What no one noticed were the limits. No sleepovers, or no spontaneous plans, no walking alone, even during the day. Questions about why were redirected, softened, dismissed. Because the world isn't kind, Nadine would say. Because bad things happen. Because I need to know where you are. Maya learned not to push. Still, unease crept in through the cracks. Sirens made Nadine freeze. Certain streets were avoided without explanation. The news played quietly, tension filling the room whenever missing persons appeared on screen. Fear lived in the house, unnamed, but absolute. Maya didn't know she had once been someone else. Didn't know her name had been replaced. Didn't know her life had started with a disappearance. She only knew she was being protected from something Nadine refused to name. And that secrecy shaped everything. Long before Maya ever realized she was the girl everyone else stopped looking for. Maya didn't notice the gaps all at once. They revealed themselves slowly, in the way absences usually do, quietly, without announcing their importance. A missing photo here, an unanswered question there. Small things easy to dismiss until they began to collect. There were no baby pictures on the walls, no albums tucked into closets. When friends brought out family scrapbooks, Maya smiled and stayed silent. Nadine said theirs had been lost during a move. Then later, she said they'd never been big on photos. The explanation shifted, but the results stayed the same. School forms raised more questions, birth certificates handled by Nadine, medical records already filled out before Maya could read them, in dates that never quite stuck in her memory because she'd never seen them written down herself. Maya told herself it didn't matter. Plenty of families were private. Plenty of parents held on to paperwork. But when classmates talked about childhood stories, first steps, early fears, old nicknames, Maya had nothing to add. Her memories didn't extend far enough back. Nadine discouraged curiosity without forbidding it outright. She smiled, changed the subject, offered distraction. Questions dissolved before they could settle. "You worry too much," she'd say gently. But Maya wasn't worried. She was unsettled. There's a difference between not knowing something and sensing it's being withheld. Maya felt the absence like a missing tooth, something her tongue kept returning to, unable to ignore. The strangest part wasn't what was missing. It was how carefully the missing pieces were avoided. And without realizing it, Maya began to understand a truth she couldn't yet name. Her life wasn't built on shared memories. It was built on omissions. By the time Maya reached 17, the rules had shaped her more than she realized. She didn't rebel. She didn't sneak out. She didn't lie convincingly. Caution had been taught early, reinforced daily, woven into how she moved through the world. She checked in without being asked. She avoided risks instinctively. Fear, when unnamed, becomes habit. Nadine framed everything as protection. She chose Maya's friends carefully, screened their parents, insisted on knowing schedules, locations, return times. What looked like care from the outside felt, from the inside, like a narrow corridor with no exits. Maya learned to measure her words. She learned which questions caused tension, which topics made Nadine's jaw tighten, her voice sharpen just enough to warn against continuing. Independence wasn't forbidden, but it was discouraged through unease. "You don't need that," Nadine would say. "Why rush growing up? Some things are better left alone." The message was consistent. Curiosity led to danger. What Maya couldn't see, but the audience can, is how deliberate that shaping was. 17 years of limits. 17 years of watchfulness. Not random. Not excessive by accident. Control doesn't always look like force. Sometimes it looks like routine. Predictable meals. Safe routes. Gentle insistence. It wears the mask of responsibility so convincingly that no one thinks to question it. including the person living inside it. Maya felt restless without understanding why. A low-grade discomfort followed her, especially when she imagined life beyond Nadine's rules. Freedom felt abstract. Risk felt terrifying. That was the design. And while Maya believed she was being protected from the world, the truth was far more specific. She was being protected from her own past, a past she had never been allowed to see. The appointment was supposed to be routine. Maya had been tired for weeks. Dizzy spells, shortness of breath she couldn't explain. Nadine insisted on the visit, hovering in the waiting room, correcting forms before Maya could finish filling them out herself. It felt familiar, controlled, safe, until it didn't. The nurse called Maya's name, her name, and led her down a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and something sharper. Blood drawn, vials labeled. A clipboard passed back and forth. Then Nadine answered questions automatically, as if rehearsed. The doctor returned later than expected. He didn't sit right away. He asked Maya to confirm basic information: date of birth, family medical history, her mother's history, her father's. Nadine answered quickly, too quickly, then stopped when the doctor raised a hand. "I need to hear it from her," he said. Something in his tone shifted the air in the room. He explained there was an inconsistency, not alarming on its own, but unusual. A result that didn't align with the records provided. It wasn't a diagnosis yet, just a flag, a reason to run one more test. Nadine's fingers tightened around her purse strap. Maya watched her carefully, noticing for the first time how fear moved across her face. Not protective fear, but recognition, as if something long avoided had finally stepped into the light. The doctor excused himself to confirm details. Silence filled the room. Maya felt it then, the sense that this wasn't about fatigue, that the test wasn't routine, that her body had uncovered something her life had been built to conceal. "This test result changes everything. Don't look away." The doctor closed the door before he spoke. It was a small gesture, but it changed the room. Privacy wasn't routine here. It was intentional. He pulled a chair closer, lowered himself to eye level, and placed the file face down on the desk. "I want to be very careful," he said. His voice was calm, measured, almost rehearsed. Not because he lacked empathy, but because he understood the weight of what followed depended on precision. He explained the process first, why the test was ordered, why it had been repeated, why results were checked more than once before being shared. He didn't rush, he didn't dramatize. He made space for understanding without revealing the conclusion yet. Maya listened, her pulse loud in her ears. Nadine sat rigid beside her, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on a spot just past the doctor's shoulder. She didn't interrupt. She didn't nod. She didn't correct him the way she usually did. That absence spoke. The doctor stressed one thing repeatedly. No assumptions had been made. No conclusions drawn prematurely. Medicine required certainty, and uncertainty demanded patience. "But sometimes," he added, "results don't align with expectations." He slid a page across the desk, not toward Nadine, but toward Maya. "This isn't a diagnosis," he said. It's an inconsistency." The word felt deliberately chosen, neutral, contained. He explained that biology followed rules, predictable ones, and when those rules were broken, it didn't mean something was wrong with the person. It meant something was wrong with the story attached to them. Maya felt the room tighten. She glanced at Nadine, expecting reassurance. What she saw instead was recognition. And in that moment, before the details were even spoken, Maya understood something irreversible had already happened. The test hadn't given answers yet, but it had taken certainty away. The doctor turned the page himself. He didn't push it forward. He didn't expect Maya to read numbers she wouldn't understand. Instead, he explained it the way someone explains gravity: simple, unavoidable, impossible to argue with. Blood carries markers, and not opinions, not memories, markers that trace relationships with mathematical certainty, parent to child, generation to generation, patterns that don't bend for circumstance. In your case, he said carefully, those markers don't match the records we have. Maya frowned. Records could be wrong. Paper could be misplaced. That much made sense. The doctor shook his head slightly. This isn't about paperwork, he continued. This is about biological connection. He paused again. Let the sentence breathe. The woman listed as your mother cannot be your biological parent. The words landed softly, but the impact was violent. Nadine didn't react. No denial, no interruption, just stillness. A stillness too complete to be confusion. Maya felt heat rise in her chest, then drain away just as fast. Her thoughts scattered, reaching for logic. Adoption, a mix-up, a clerical error buried deep in hospital archives. The doctor addressed each possibility before she could voice it. The probability was negligible, the confirmation repeated, the margin for mistake effectively non-existent. Biology, he explained, was unforgiving. It didn't adjust to narratives, it didn't protect feelings. It simply revealed truth when asked the right question. Maya turned to Nadine, waiting for explanation. None came. Silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. The kind of silence that confirms what words try to deny. Whatever Maya believed about her life, about where she came from, had just encountered a wall it couldn't pass through. And the wall wasn't emotional. It was biological. Maya's first instinct was to laugh, not because it was funny, but because disbelief needed somewhere to go. So her chest felt tight, her hands unsteady. She pressed them against her thighs, grounding herself in the chair, in the room, in something solid. "This doesn't make sense," she said. The doctor didn't contradict her. He nodded slowly, as if acknowledging that sense had just been removed from the equation. Nadine still hadn't spoken. Maya turned fully toward her now, searching her face for urgency, for protest, for anything that resembled the mother she had always known. What she found instead was restraint. Too much restraint. Fear sat behind Nadine's eyes, but not surprise. "Say something," Maya whispered. Nadine swallowed. Her lips parted, then closed again. Whatever explanation she had rehearsed over the years had not been built for this moment. Words failed her. The doctor stood, offering space without leaving. He explained next steps mechanically. Additional tests, documentation review, counseling options. But his voice faded into background noise. Maya's thoughts moved faster than language. Every memory reorganized itself. Rules she had never questioned. Boundaries that now felt intentional. The constant watchfulness. The absence of stories. The missing past. It hadn't been caution. It had been containment. Maya stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sound broke the tension, but not the truth. She wasn't angry yet. She was hollow, and in that hollow space, a single realization formed. Quiet, terrifying, undeniable. Nothing about her life was guaranteed to be real. The doctor didn't speak right away. He watched Maya breathe, watched Nadine unravel in silence, watched the space between them widen into something permanent. Years of routine had collapsed into a single moment, and rushing it would only do harm. So he waited. The room felt smaller now. The hum of the lights grew louder. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled, a phone rang. Life continued without noticing what had just broken. Maya stared at the wall, afraid that if she looked at Nadine again, something inside her would shatter completely. She needed distance from the answers forming in her head, distance from the implications pressing in from every side. The doctor finally spoke, his voice low, deliberate. "There are follow-up steps," he said. "Counseling, records requests, time to process." He stopped himself, because there are moments when instructions don't matter, when the human mind needs truth before it needs guidance. He met Maya's eyes, and then he said it. "Your life may not be yours." The sentence didn't echo. It didn't need to. It sat in the air, heavy and irreversible, rewriting 17 years with brutal efficiency. Everything Maya believed about herself, her name, her history, her place in the world, tilted off balance. Nadine finally broke. A sharp inhale, a tremor in her hands. The sound of someone realizing silence is no longer an option. But whatever explanation was coming next, whatever truth had been buried for nearly 2 decades, it would never undo this moment. Because the pause had already done its damage, and nothing, no test, no story, no justification, would ever make life feel simple again. Maya didn't drift into the attic. She went there with purpose. After the hospital visit, curiosity hardened into method. She stopped asking Nadine questions that would go unanswered and started examining spaces that had never been offered for explanation. The attic was one of them, rarely mentioned, never entered, sealed off by habit more than locks. Dust coated the steps. Boxes lined the walls in neat, deliberate rows. Nothing looked rummaged through. Nothing suggested neglect. This wasn't a forgotten place. It was a preserved one. Maya moved slowly, opening lids just enough to see contents before closing them again. Holiday decorations, old linens, tools wrapped carefully in cloth. Everything labeled in Nadine's handwriting, except one corner. That absence caught her attention. She followed it to the far end, where the ceiling dipped low and the light thinned. Behind stacked suitcases she didn't recognize sat a narrow gap, deliberately left unfilled. Not accidental, intentional spacing required planning. Maya knelt and reached inside. Her fingers brushed metal. She froze. The object was cool, compact, and heavier than it should have been for its size. She pulled it free and held it under the light. A small tin box, unlabeled. No dust on the lid, no rust along the seams, recently handled or carefully maintained. Maya didn't open it, not yet. She waited in her hands, listening for movement inside, for any sound that might betray what Nadine believed this space could hide forever. The attic creaked softly around her, the house settling as if aware something had shifted. Maya stood there longer than she realized. Because whatever this was, it wasn't stored away by accident. And once something is hidden on purpose, it stops being a keepsake. It becomes evidence. The box didn't belong in the attic, not among seasonal decorations and storage bins, not tucked away for convenience. Its placement was too precise, too protected. Maya noticed it immediately once she looked closer. It had been slid into a space that required intention to reach, not hidden in chaos, but positioned where it wouldn't be stumbled upon. No label, no date, no context, just containment. Maya carried it downstairs instead of opening it there. She didn't want dust or darkness shaping the moment. Whatever this was, it had been preserved for a reason, and reasons mattered now. At the kitchen table, she examined it carefully. The tin showed no dents. The edges were clean. The lid fit tightly, as if it had been opened and closed many times without wear. Someone had cared enough to protect it from damage, from moisture, from time. And this wasn't forgetfulness. It was control. Maya tried to imagine Nadine holding the box, choosing where to place it, choosing not to discard it, choosing not to destroy it. Those decisions formed a pattern, one she was only just beginning to recognize. She rested her hand on the lid, resisting the urge to pry it open. Evidence wasn't just about what you found. It was about understanding why it existed at all. If the contents were harmless, there would be no need for concealment. And if they were dangerous, the decision to keep them meant something far more complicated than guilt. Maya inhaled slowly. Whatever was inside that tin box had survived 17 years for a reason. And that reason was about to surface. Maya opened the box carefully. Inside, there was no clutter, no collection of objects, and just a single folded newspaper clipping and a $5 bill placed beneath it, pressed flat as if it had never been meant to circulate. The bill caught her attention first. It wasn't torn. It wasn't worn thin at the edges. The creases were sharp, intentional, folded once, then folded again, and never touched after that. Maya checked the year printed along the edge. It matched. The same year the girl disappeared. Money is meant to move, to pass hands, to be spent, exchanged, lost. This hadn't done any of that. It had been frozen in time, preserved the way people preserve moments they don't want slipping away. Maya tried to imagine the moment it was folded, where it came from, why it was saved instead of used. $5 wasn't sentimental by itself. It became meaningful only when it was kept. This wasn't savings. It was a marker. People keep objects like this when they want to remember a decision or justify one. Sometimes they keep them as proof that something happened exactly the way they tell themselves it did. Maya didn't need an explanation yet to understand the implication. The bill wasn't there by accident, and it wasn't there for practical reasons. It was there because someone couldn't let go of the moment it represented. Maya placed the bill back exactly where she found it and reached for the clipping beneath it. She already knew this was no longer about suspicion. This was about confirmation. The newspaper clipping was older than it looked. The edges had been trimmed cleanly, not torn. Folded once, then flattened. Preserved the way someone preserves a document they expect to return to, not a memory they're ready to release. Maya read it once, then again. A missing girl, same year, same town, same details she had never been allowed to hear. The photo was grainy, but unmistakable, younger, smaller, a face that should have been hers. Her stomach tightened, not from shock, but from alignment. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't curiosity gone too far. The tin box hadn't been holding reminders. It had been holding confirmation. Maya didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't run downstairs demanding explanations. She cataloged date, location, language used in the article, what was emphasized, what was omitted. The habits she developed during weeks of quiet research took over instinctively. Emotion could wait. Structure couldn't. She returned everything to the box exactly as she found it, folded the clipping, smoothed the bill, closed the lid, not to protect Nadine, but to preserve the chain of truth. Once physical proof exists, denial stops being confusion. It becomes choice. Maya carried the tin box back to the attic and placed it where it had been hidden. Not because she was afraid, but because she needed Nadine unchanged, unalerted, unprepared. The investigation had crossed a line. No theories left, no maybes remaining, only intent, evidence, and a truth that had been waiting patiently to be uncovered. So now we ask you, guilty or broken? Tell us what you think. Because once proof locks the door, there's no returning to who you believed someone was. Maya didn't announce her decision. She packed quietly. A small bag, essentials only. Nothing that would invite questions. Nothing that would slow her down. Nadine was in the kitchen when Maya slipped on her jacket, her movements calm enough to avoid suspicion. "I'll be back tomorrow," Maya said. It wasn't a lie. It was incomplete. Nadine looked up, startled by the timing, not the statement. "Where are you going?" Maya met her eyes for a brief moment, long enough to register concern, not long enough to invite conversation. "I need to clear my head." That much was true. She didn't explain why she was leaving so suddenly. She didn't mention Iowa City. She didn't reference the attic, the tin box, or the evidence now arranged carefully in her thoughts. Confrontation would have changed things, alerted Nadine, given her time to prepare answers. Maya needed truth unshaped. She stepped outside before fear could settle in. The air felt sharper, colder, as if the world had adjusted to her decision. When she started the car, her hand shook, not from doubt, but from urgency. Some truths can't be chased from inside the house that hid them. They require distance. As Maya pulled away, she checked the rearview mirror once. The house looked unchanged, quiet, contained. But something irreversible had already begun. And once the road opened in front of her, there was no version of this drive that ended with things staying the same. The highway swallowed her quickly. Once Maya merged onto the road, the world narrowed into lanes, signs and numbers ticking down. 6 hours, 360 miles, too far to turn back without noticing, too close to pretend this was just a drive. She didn't turn on the radio. Silence sharpened everything. The hum of the tires, the steady pull of the engine, her own breathing, counted unconsciously between exits. Mile markers flashed past like timestamps, evidence of movement she couldn't pause. Exit 41, exit 52, exit 68. Each one felt like a decision reaffirmed. Maya tried not to think in conclusions. She focused on distance instead, how far she'd come, how far remained. The farther she drove, the heavier the truth felt, as if the road itself were compressing time. She replayed moments she had never questioned before. Nadine's rules, the missing records, the silence where stories should have been. Each memory aligned too cleanly now, snapping into place with uncomfortable efficiency. Her phone buzzed once. She didn't look. Whatever waited at the other end of this drive would demand clarity, not distraction. Calls could wait. Explanations could wait. This stretch of road was for reckoning. 3 hours left. Maya tightened her grip on the wheel. The closer she got to Iowa City, the less space there was between who she had been and who she might become. And with every mile, the countdown accelerated toward answers that could no longer be avoided. Somewhere past the halfway point, Maya stopped thinking in miles. She started thinking in names. Her own felt unstable now, something borrowed, not owned. She tried saying it silently, testing how it landed. It sounded practiced, familiar, wrong in a way she couldn't yet define. She tried another, the name from the clipping, the one that belonged to the girl who vanished. It felt heavier, older, like stepping into a coat she wasn't sure would fit. Neither felt safe. Names, she realized, weren't just labels. They were permissions. They told the world how to see you, how to remember you. And right now, Maya didn't know which version of herself deserved to exist. The road signs began to change. Distances shortened. Cities she'd only heard of in passing slipped by her windows. Iowa City stopped being an idea and became a destination, an origin point waiting to be confronted. She imagined explaining herself and failed every time. There was no sentence that didn't sound impossible, no version of the truth that didn't fracture the moment it was spoken aloud. So she stopped rehearsing. Some answers had to arrive before language could follow. As the skyline began to form faintly in the distance, Maya felt something close to resolve. Not confidence, not certainty, just readiness. Whatever name waited for her there, whatever life it pointed to, she would face it without pretending. Because the road behind her had already erased the option of going back. The building was smaller than Maya expected. No dramatic signage, no sense of occasion. Just fluorescent lights, neutral walls, and a waiting room designed to feel forgettable. That felt intentional. Truth didn't need atmosphere. It needed consent. She filled out the form slowly. Name, date of birth, contact information. Each line felt provisional, as if it could be revised later. She hesitated only once, pen hovering, before committing ink to paper. This was the point of no return. A technician called her back without ceremony, explained the process in practiced phrases. Swab, seal, label, nothing invasive, nothing painful, efficient, controlled. Maya watched closely. The swab touched her cheek. Seconds passed. The sample was placed into a container and marked with a code that stripped it of identity. No name, no story, just data waiting to be matched. That was the moment everything narrowed. Once DNA is submitted, time stops behaving normally. The past stops being abstract. It becomes measurable, comparable, capable of answering questions no one can outrun. Maya signed one final line. Consent, not to know, but to be known. As she stepped back outside, the city moved around her, unaware of what had just been set in motion. Cars passed, conversations continued, life behaved as if nothing had changed. But something had. Because now, the truth wasn't hidden in an attic or locked inside silence. It was in a system designed to connect what was lost. And once DNA is given, the past doesn't ask permission before it speaks. Detective Miller wasn't expecting anything unusual that morning. The notification appeared among routine updates. Lab entries, status changes, administrative noise that blended together after decades on the job. He almost clicked past it. Then he saw the name. He read it once, then again. Time folded inward. Some cases don't fade. They don't resolve themselves quietly in the back of your mind. They wait, dormant, unfinished, until something sharp enough brings them back intact. This one did exactly that. Miller leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the screen. The date attached to the request, the originating lab, the age of the subject. Every detail aligned too cleanly to be coincidence. 17 years. He remembered the bike, the gas station footage, the unanswered questions that had hardened into procedure and eventually into silence. He remembered telling a mother there was nothing more they could do, not because he believed it, but because the system had limits. Now the system was speaking again. Miller didn't react outwardly. No sudden movements. No call to a colleague. He checked the case file first, pulling it up the way muscle memory demands. He scanned names, timelines, notes written in an earlier version of his own handwriting. There it was, the missing girl, The age progression that never aged enough. The case that never gave him a reason to close it. Miller exhaled slowly. Somewhere out there, someone had submitted DNA, believing it might explain who they were. What it was about to explain instead was who had never stopped waiting. And for the first time in years, Miller didn't feel the weight of another dead end. He felt recognition. The confirmation arrived without drama. No alarms, no red flags flashing across a screen. Just a line of text, a match probability so high it left no room for interpretation. Numbers didn't speculate. They didn't soften language. They stated fact and moved on. The system didn't pause for history. Miller read the report carefully, slower than necessary. He checked identifiers, case numbers, chain of custody. Everything matched, everything held. There it was, the biological link no one had been able to prove in 1997. The answer that technology hadn't been ready to give back then, delivered now with unsettling ease. 17 years of silence, resolved in seconds. Miller closed his eyes briefly, not in disbelief, but in acknowledgement. This was the part of the job that never felt routine. Not because it was rare, but because it was final. In DNA, didn't care about narratives. It didn't weigh intentions or judge choices. It confirmed connection and stepped aside. Whatever came next belonged to people, not processes. He thought of the mother who had refused to let the case become a footnote, of the limits he'd explained, the resources he hadn't been allowed to spend, the uncertainty he'd learned to live with. The truth had been there all along, just out of reach. Now it wasn't. Miller forwarded the confirmation to the appropriate channels, his movements deliberate, controlled. Each click carried consequence. Each action moved the case out of limbo and back into the present. The match didn't hesitate. After all this time, the answer had been waiting for the right question. The confirmation didn't arrive with ceremony. It appeared as a line of data, clean, precise, unforgiving. A match probability so high it erased doubt entirely. Detective Miller didn't rush it. He checked the identifiers, the case number, the lab chain. Each step confirmed the same result. There were no gaps to argue with, no ambiguity to hide behind. 17 years of unanswered questions resolved in seconds. DNA didn't consider history. It didn't weigh emotion or intention. It identified connection and moved on, indifferent to how long people had waited for it. Miller felt the shift immediately. The case was no longer theoretical, no longer archived. It had crossed back into the present. He thought of the limits he'd once explained, the resources that hadn't existed, the certainty technology couldn't provide back then. Now it could. He forwarded the confirmation without commentary. No reaction was necessary. The truth didn't need one. After years of silence, the answer didn't hesitate. It never does. Once it's finally asked. Maya didn't know what time it was when her phone rang. She had been waiting without counting, refreshing nothing, pacing nowhere, existing in that hollow stretch where anticipation turns physical. The number on the screen wasn't familiar. She answered anyway. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, grounded in procedure. He introduced himself, confirmed her identity, and paused, just long enough for the weight of what followed to settle. "We have a match," he said. No build-up, no dramatic framing, just truth delivered at the speed it deserved. Maya didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her breath caught sharply, then steadied as if her body had been rehearsing this moment without her permission. The words didn't feel explosive, and they felt anchoring. For the first time in her life, something about her existed without doubt, without conditions, without explanation required. A line had been drawn between who she was told she was and who she actually was, and that line now held. The detective explained next steps, options, support, what would happen and what wouldn't. Maya absorbed it distantly. The details mattered, but not as much as the confirmation itself. She sat down slowly, phone pressed to her ear, eyes fixed on nothing. 17 years of uncertainty didn't collapse all at once. It loosened. And in that quiet release, Maya realized something profound. Hope hadn't been wrong. It had just been early. Detective Miller stayed seated long after the call ended. There was no urge to celebrate, no impulse to announce it down the hall. Some outcomes demand restraint, not because they're small, but because they're sacred. Cases like this don't resolve loudly. They surface quietly, carried by people who refuse to forget. A mother who kept asking, a daughter who kept digging. Years of silence undone by persistence and timing. Miller updated the file with care. Not rushed, not perfunctory. He wrote as if the words themselves deserved respect. This wasn't just a match, it was validation. Proof that waiting hadn't been foolish, that effort hadn't been wasted. Outside his office, the department moved as usual. Phones rang. Doors opened and closed. Most people didn't know what had just happened. That felt right. Miracles in cases like this don't arrive with fireworks. They arrive with alignment, with confirmation, with the simple, powerful correction of a wrong that had been allowed to stand too long. 17 years later, the system finally caught up to the truth. And that's why we stay. That's why we remember. Because some stories don't end when people stop looking. They end when someone refuses to stop. Before Nadine made a choice that would define her forever, she was already living with absence. Not the kind people notice. The quiet kind. Empty rooms. Days that repeated without meaning. A future that had narrowed so slowly she barely recognized when it disappeared. She carried loss without spectacle. No breakdowns, no public grief. Just endurance. She wanted something ordinary, a role, a reason to wake up and matter to someone. That desire didn't make her dangerous. It made her human. Nadine learned to survive by controlling what she could. Her schedule, her environment, her emotions. She built a life that looked stable from the outside because instability had already taken too much from her. And grief, when left alone long enough, changes shape. It stops asking for comfort. It starts asking for correction. Nadine didn't wake up one day intending to ruin a life. She imagined a solution, a way to replace what had been taken, a way to rewrite an ending that never felt fair. That's the unsettling part, because nothing about her pain was imaginary, and nothing about what she did was accidental. She wasn't driven by rage, she was driven by longing. And when longing hardens into resolve, the line between need and harm becomes terrifyingly easy to cross. That's where Nadine stood, long before anyone noticed she was capable of stepping over it. Nadine didn't take a child at random. And that's what makes this harder to confront. Maya wasn't chosen in a moment of panic or confusion. She was selected, observed, evaluated. The timing mattered. The opportunity mattered. Nadine didn't act until the conditions aligned in a way that felt almost justified to her. This wasn't impulse. It was preparation disguised as patience. Replacement doesn't mean imitation. Nadine wasn't trying to recreate the life she lost exactly as it was. She wasn't chasing a copy. She was chasing function, a role that needed filling, a future that needed anchoring, a child who could be shaped without resistance. That distinction is critical. Grief can explain pain. It can explain desperation, but it cannot explain logistics. Planning requires clarity. Execution requires intent. Nadine crossed from suffering into strategy long before anyone realized it. She understood systems, paperwork, trust, how little scrutiny a composed woman attracts. She relied on the assumption that someone who appears stable must be harmless, and it worked for years. What makes the motive disturbing isn't that she loved Maya. It's that she loved her in a way that required erasure. Love that demands silence. Love that survives only if the truth stays buried. This wasn't about saving a child from harm. It was about saving herself from emptiness. And that's where sympathy begins to fracture, because understanding why she did it doesn't reduce the cost of what she took. It clarifies it. This is where the story stops being comfortable. Because grief explains Nadine's pain, but it doesn't absolve her actions. What she did wasn't an emotional accident. It wasn't a moment that spiraled. It was a line she crossed knowingly, then spent years justifying in silence. Every bedtime story, every school form, every doctor's visit, each one required a decision to continue. And she did, again and again. That's the weight of it. Crime isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet consistency. Sometimes it's choosing, daily, to let a lie mature into a life. Nadine told herself she was protecting Maya, that the truth would destroy her, that love mattered more than origin. These weren't lies she invented overnight. They were beliefs she rehearsed until they felt moral. Grief gave her the excuse. Control gave her the confidence. And the world helped. No alarms, no confrontations. No one questioned a woman who looked devoted, organized, calm. Society often mistakes composure for innocence. But crime doesn't require cruelty to exist. It only requires entitlement, the belief that your pain grants you permission to decide for someone else. That's where Nadine's story fractures. Because while her grief was real, the harm was deliberate. And intention, once sustained, becomes responsibility. This isn't a question of whether she suffered. It's a question of whether suffering can justify rewriting another person's life without consent. And that question doesn't have a clean answer. Nadine's greatest act wasn't taking a child. It was keeping the truth contained. Silence became her system. She avoided cameras, conversations, paperwork that lingered. She moved when questions felt too close. She corrected details before they could harden into records. Nothing dramatic, nothing traceable. Just enough distance to stay invisible. That's how calculated disappearance survives, through restraint. She didn't erase the past all at once. She starved it. No photographs that predated her story. No keepsakes that raised timelines. No curiosity encouraged. Maya's questions were redirected, never denied. Confusion softened with reassurance. This wasn't chaos. It was maintenance. And maintenance requires awareness. Every year that passed made the truth heavier and harder to release. At some point, silence stopped being protection and became preservation. Not of Maya, but of Nadine herself. Because confession wouldn't just reveal a crime. It would unravel a life that had been built carefully enough to feel earned. That's the final moral tension. Nadine wasn't hiding because she didn't care. She was hiding because she cared in a way that demanded ownership. And that's what leaves us divided. Was she a woman consumed by grief who made an unforgivable choice? Or someone who made an unforgivable choice and learned to live with it? That line, between broken and guilty, is thin, and once crossed, it doesn't move back. Monster or broken mother? Decide in the comments. They didn't rush the meeting. That mattered. The room was neutral, too neutral. Beige walls, soft chairs spaced carefully apart. No family photos, no history allowed to speak for itself. Just people carrying decades in their bodies, pretending to breathe normally. Alara brought a sketchbook. Not photographs, not documents, a sketchbook. She had drawn her daughter's face for years, not from memory alone, but from instinct. Adjusting lines as time passed, aging the eyes, softening the jaw, letting the child become a woman on paper long before the world confirmed it. Maya noticed it immediately. She didn't know why. Her attention kept drifting back to Alara's hands, the way they hovered, uncertain, like someone afraid to touch something fragile that might disappear if named too quickly. No one said the names yet. Names are heavy. Names claim space. Instead, they spoke about small things. The drive, the weather, how strange the quiet felt. Each sentence was a test. Can I exist here without breaking something? Then Alara slid the sketchbook across the table. No explanation, just paper. Maya turned the page and stopped. Because recognition doesn't always come from memory. Sometimes it comes from alignment, from the feeling that something long misaligned has quietly clicked into place. No one cried yet, but something fundamental shifted. The question came softly. What was my name? No one had prompted it. No one had suggested it. Maya asked because the air had changed, and she could feel it pressing against her. Alara didn't answer right away. She inhaled, exhaled, once, twice, as if preparing to speak a language she hadn't used aloud in years. Then she said it, not loudly, not ceremonially, just truth, released. The name didn't sound foreign to Maya. It didn't feel imposed. It landed gently, like something that had been waiting for permission to return. She repeated it, testing the weight. Something in her chest tightened. Not pain, not relief. Recognition without memory. A familiarity that bypassed logic. Julian couldn't look at her, because hearing the name spoken by someone else made the loss real again, and different. It wasn't absence anymore. It was presence, arriving late. Maya asked another question. Did I answer to it? Alara nodded. Yes, she said. You always did. That did it. The past didn't rush in all at once. It seeped, slow, careful, as if even time itself understood this moment needed restraint. Names don't restore years, but they unlock doors that have been closed so long the body forgets what's on the other side. They searched for something dramatic, a flash, a remembered room, a sudden image breaking through the years. It never came. Instead, recognition arrived quietly, in posture, in pauses, in the way Maya tilted her head when thinking, exactly the way Alara used to, in how she listened more than she spoke, in the same instinct to withdraw when emotions felt too large to manage. These weren't coincidences. They were continuities. Maya noticed it too, though she couldn't explain why. She kept watching Alara's face, studying expressions she felt she should already understand. Not learning, remembering without images. That confused her, because memory is supposed to be visual, concrete, verifiable. This wasn't. This was bodily, emotional, a recognition that lived somewhere deeper than thought. Julian finally spoke. You always did that, he said quietly. Maya looked up. Did what? He gestured vaguely, unsure how to explain something so small it felt sacred. Disappeared into yourself, he said, when things felt loud. Maya didn't respond. because that wasn't something she'd been told before. It was something she knew, and knowing it from him, without explanation, felt like being seen by someone who hadn't been there, yet somehow never left. Well, that's the moment the story changed. Not when the facts aligned, but when familiarity existed without evidence. They didn't embrace right away. That surprises people. Reunions aren't always collisions. Sometimes they're calibrations. Everyone adjusting to gravity that feels familiar but heavier than expected. What returned first wasn't memory, it was rhythm. The conversation found a pace without effort. Silences didn't need filling. No one rushed to prove anything. They existed together in a way that felt earned, not forced. Alara noticed it most when Maya laughed. Not the sound, but the pause before it. The split second of restraint, as if joy needed permission. Alara had seen that pause before. She had carried it herself for years. Maya felt something else. Safety. Not comfort. Not certainty. In safety, the rare feeling that nothing was being taken from her in this room. No expectations, no performance, no demand to become someone else to make others whole. That mattered, because reunions fail when they ask too much, too fast. This one didn't. They talked about the future instead of the past. Small things, neutral things. What could exist without pressure? What didn't need explanation yet? And slowly something settled. Not closure, continuity. The kind that doesn't erase what was lost, but allows what remains to stand without apology. This wasn't an ending. It was alignment. The courtroom was full, not with noise, but with expectation. People came looking for resolution, a verdict that would balance the scale. A moment where years of confusion could be compressed into a single word that made sense of everything. They didn't get that. Trials are designed to answer legal questions, not human ones. The law focused on timelines, documents, intent. It separated actions from emotions because it has to. That structure is its strength and its limitation. Nadine sat quietly. No spectacle, no collapse, just stillness. Some saw guilt in that. Others saw exhaustion. Most couldn't decide which unsettled them more. Alara attended when she could. Maya attended when she felt strong enough. Neither stayed long. Justice, they learned, can be necessary without being healing, because no sentence could return childhood. No ruling could simplify what had happened. The court could define responsibility, but it couldn't redistribute the years. It couldn't undo birthdays lived under a different name. It couldn't tell Maya who she was supposed to feel loyalty toward now. That burden stayed with them. When the verdict came, it landed without triumph. There was no sense of victory, only confirmation. The truth had weight, but it didn't lift anything by itself. And that's the lesson most people miss. Accountability matters, but it doesn't automatically repair what was broken. The decision didn't come from the bench. It came from Maya. By the time authorities prepared to move forward, the facts were settled. The evidence was sufficient. The outcome, on paper, was predictable. This was the moment when consequences usually arrive cleanly, procedurally sound, emotionally distant. Maya interrupted that certainty. She asked to speak, not as a victim, not as evidence, as a person who had lived both sides of the truth. She told them she wasn't asking for denial. What happened mattered. What was taken mattered. But she had seen Nadine's condition up close, the medical reports, the fatigue that no discipline could hide, the reality that time was already shortening her sentence in ways no court could rival. Maya said something that unsettled the room. She said punishment wouldn't give her back a past, and it wouldn't give Nadine a future. Then Nadine spoke. Briefly, carefully. She didn't plead innocence. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She acknowledged the harm without softening it, and asked only that Maya not be asked to carry another loss in the name of balance. She said she had already taken enough from one life. Silence followed, because mercy complicates justice in ways rules can't easily resolve. The decision that followed wasn't celebratory. It wasn't framed as absolution. The charges weren't rewritten as innocence. They were withheld, deliberately, consciously, because everyone in that room understood something rare. This wasn't about letting someone escape consequence. It was about choosing not to multiply damage. And for the first time since the disappearance, the story moved forward without taking something else away. Identity doesn't snap back into place once the truth is known. It fractures first. Maya didn't lose one life and regain another. She had to learn how to hold two realities without letting either erase her. The name she was born with carried history she never lived. The name she grew up with carried comfort built on omission. Both were real. Neither was complete on its own. Rebuilding meant starting with small, deliberate choices. Which name to answer to in private? Which memories to keep untouched? Which questions to postpone because answers arrived too heavy to carry daily? She learned that identity isn't discovered, it's assembled, piece by piece, with permission to pause. Alara struggled too, in quieter ways. Loving someone you lost and found again requires restraint. She had to grieve the child she raised only in imagination, while accepting the adult standing in front of her didn't owe her restoration. Julian learned when to speak, and when silence was the greater gift. Progress didn't look like healing montages or sudden clarity. It looked like discomfort tolerated without panic. It looked like days where nothing resolved, yet nothing collapsed. That's what rebuilding actually costs. Not effort, but patience. And patience, after years of uncertainty, can feel like its own kind of courage. This case doesn't end with closure. It ends with responsibility for the people inside it and for the ones watching from the outside. Because disappearance isn't only about the moment someone vanishes. It's about what follows, how long attention lasts, how quickly compassion fades, and how easily unresolved stories become background noise. Maya's life will always include an asterisk, not as a flaw, but as a reminder that identity can survive disruption without becoming defined by it. Alara's grief didn't disappear when her daughter returned. It changed shape. It learned to coexist with presence instead of absence. And Nadine's story forces a question we don't like to sit with. Can harm exist without malice? Can love coexist with wrongdoing? Can compassion be offered without erasing accountability? There are no clean answers, only awareness. Now, this story asks us to stay engaged longer than comfort allows, to notice when attention drifts, to remember that cases don't end when headlines do. They continue quietly, inside the people who lived them. That's the life lesson. Pay attention, stay curious, and don't look away just because the noise stops. Because the moment we stop watching is often the moment truth is left alone. This story didn't survive because it was shocking. It survived because someone refused to let it disappear. Years passed. Evidence faded. Attention moved on. The city kept breathing, as if nothing had been left unresolved. And that's the quiet danger. Most stories don't end with answers. They end with silence. What changed everything here wasn't technology. It wasn't luck. It wasn't timing. It was persistence. A mother who kept asking questions long after people stopped listening. A daughter who sensed something was wrong and chose to look closer. And a truth that waited patiently until someone was ready to face it. That's the uncomfortable takeaway. Most cases don't collapse because the truth is impossible to find. They collapse because attention expires, because watching is tiring, because remembering is inconvenient, because it's easier to believe someone else will care enough. This channel exists to push back against that instinct, not to sensationalize pain, but to refuse collective amnesia. Every story you've heard here survived because someone stayed engaged longer than comfort allowed. And the moment we stop doing that, these stories don't just fade from screens. They fade from consequence. If stories like this matter to you, don't just watch, stay, subscribe so these cases don't vanish again. And if you won't subscribe, tell us why in the comments. Because silence is how stories disappear, and attention is how they come back. We remember so they don't have to be lost twice. In 1997, Lisa Davis went to get a gallon of milk in Iowa City. She was gone in 240 seconds. No struggle, no tracks, just a bike propped against a brick wall. 17 years of silence, a marriage destroyed, a mother told she'd never hold her child again, until a medical emergency in a different state revealed a terrifying truth. Maya tried to save her dying mother with a blood donation, but the doctor had a message that stopped her heart. Biologically, this woman isn't even related to you. She wasn't a daughter, she was a trophy, and the woman she called mom was actually her kidnapper. This is the impossible homecoming of Lisa Davis.